Hey, y'all, and welcome to another episode and a whole new season of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. I'm your host, Cory Camp. We've taken about a month and a half or so off, and here we are back again with one of my favorite guests, Steve Barkley. And I love our topic for today, Steve, because I know a big conversation last year, last semester especially, and especially as we've gotten, I actually just got my kiddos' state test results in the mail yesterday, and is this idea of we've got a lot of work ahead of us as we come back into the schools. A lot of folks are going back in person this year. We are returning to normal, if there is such a thing. I know you and I are going to talk a little bit about that, but really, it is a stressful return, I feel, for a lot of our educators. We're excited. We can't wait to get back into our classrooms and be with our students. But we also have this stress of this idea of, the learning loss, the COVID slide, and how do we overcome that? How do we get right into that? And so as we think about our return into schools and thinking about our maybe moving from a problem-focused mindset and reframing the problems, reframing the mindset. You wrote an amazing blog on this, which we'll make sure folks get access to the full blog. But you got a couple of, big ideas around it, 4 big ideas for thinking about reframing the problem and reframing our mindsets. And so let's start with this first one, especially around this idea of kind of coming back to school and thinking about the learning loss. So I'll kind of let you take it from there. But before you start, I just want to remind folks, if you've got a question for us, if you're watching live, put it in the comments below and we might feature that during the show. All right, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Cory. It's always great to be with you.
Yeah.
So a little bit as I jump in here, I as soon as we were looking at coming out of COVID, which knows when that is now, but as soon as that was raised, I was sure we didn't want to go back to normal. And in many ways, for me, what COVID did was it shined a light on strengths that we had, and it shined a light on problems.
Yeah,
I don't know to what extent it really created new ones. They just kind of stood out there.
Push them to the forefront, right? Like social emotional learning.
Yeah, it was always important.
Equity. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Always there. Really shone the light on it. Yeah.
The inequity in technology, it's not like that problem didn't exist. So it kind of shone the light on it. So I really had been thinking about this. How do we refocus? How do we have a different mindset? So the first one of the 4 ideas that I pulled up was focusing on love versus fear. Right. And very interesting. This is the one that triggered me to write the blog, and it came from a friend of mine, Adam Fishman, who is leading a group on climate change. And he sent out this rather lengthy blog that he realized he had to change his mindset, and that his mindset had been getting people to hate the bad things about the climate. And he realized instead he needed to switch to get people to focus on the things that they love, that they're going to lose.
Right.
We don't focus on these things that they love. So it was a lot easier to get energy out of people by focusing on nature, focusing on who are the people that grow the crops and how do we get the crops, and that approach rather than the fear approach. And I'm sitting there reading his piece and I'm going, wow, that's the issue we got for teachers. Right. If everybody's putting learning loss in front of the teacher, the last thing I want to do on an opening day of school when kids are finally back and I'm looking to build all this excitement is to have this picture in my mind of just how far behind are these kids? How are we going to get caught up? And communicating that to the kids. And so my issue was, let's fall in love with the fact that we've been waiting to have kids here in the room with us.
Right.
They're finally here. We've been waiting to do all the exciting things with kids. We're tired of all the kids who are on Zoom and not clicking on the camera.
Right.
So what are all the things, and how does that change your mindset? If you walk into the school excited about all the things we can do and all the things we can accomplish and moving ahead.
And I think that's so valuable. And as we think about, our role as instructional leaders, I mean, we really are the leaders in this reframing. That message comes from us. Our teachers look to us to support and then reinforce and walk the walk, right? We can't say, oh, don't worry about the learning loss, and then, shove data and all kinds of things in front of their face and say, how are we going to fix it? How are we going to fix it? We really do have to come from that place of love over fear.
Where are we? Where are we? And where do we want to go?
Yep.
And let's go. Let's be excited about going there rather than shining this light backwards. It has pushed me to get teachers thinking that it's about speeding things up and not remediating. And the more that I'm focused on loss, on what kids didn't get last year, the more likely I am to take that remedial approach. And that's not going to put anybody in the right mindset for moving ahead.
Yeah, you and I were just talking backstage about this big idea around acceleration rather than remediation, and the importance of that, and the questions that are coming around from that. But I also think, there's something also here in this point, this love versus fear. My nephew and niece are visiting here this afternoon. They're all outside having pizza for lunch right now. And when they came in, I said, hey, you guys excited for school to start? They start a day before my kids do, and they're just a town over. And I was really surprised because my nephew, who's not necessarily been one for school, was like, I can't wait. I'm excited. And I was like, are you sick? Are you okay? But I think our students are also leaning into that excitement, right? They're excited to be in a school, to have some space away from their parents or their siblings, and, to kind of just move back into school is now a little bit more exciting for them. And I think we've got to lean into that too.
Absolutely.
Right. Lean into the strengths and the things that they've learned over the past 20 some months, and, build upon that. So I definitely love that. So let's think differently about learning loss is what I'm hearing here. What else kind of, because I know that was just kind of the snowball. That was the tip of the iceberg.
That got me started. And then I found an article that said we needed to think about schools as an ecosystem and an acorn. So when I dug into the ecosystem piece, and this came from Sam Chaltain, and in my blog, I have all the links to all of their original stuff. And so he was talking about seeing an ecosystem rather than an assembly line. And I've always been big on the ecosystem. I'm a big Margaret Wheatley fan. And Wheatley always talks about the way a system works is much more like the way a school system should work, the way a school should work. Is much more like an ecosystem than it is an assembly line.
Absolutely.
Should, but it has way too many assembly line pieces in. And this has always spoken to me because I paid my way through college on the assembly line.
Right.
I worked in the cardboard factory, and it was a machine 3 blocks long. And at one end of the machine, giant rolls of paper were fed in, and 3 blocks away, it spit out piles of cardboard. And my job was to catch a pile and stack it. And one day I saw a piece of cardboard jammed under a belt, and I thought it might knock a belt off, and I went running over and shut down the system. And a little while later, not very shortly later, a supervisor was screaming and yelling, "What did you do?" And I said, "I thought," and that's as far as I got. And he informed me that catchers don't think, they catch. Okay.
Oh, wow.
This is your job. This is your piece. And it dawned on me when I began teaching. There was kind of this feeling, I started my student teaching, and I watched the teacher for 2 days, and then I tapped her on the shoulder and she stepped out and I stepped in. It was like, oh my God, I'm back to being a catcher. And so it really hit me now. Go back to the learning loss. Are we worried about a learning loss because we're really thinking that a fifth grade teacher can't take the kids from where they are when they come into her classroom and move ahead? I mean, are we really thinking that she can only handle the assembly line delivery of here's where kids are supposed to be in order to start your program? I've been a big proponent of the only way to serve kids today is as a team, and ecosystems are teams. It's all interconnected, and I think coaches need to dedicate a major chunk of time to building the team relations of a school. And I've often said, if I were an administrator, when I had my coach partnership meeting with my coach, that would be one of my expectations, that the sense of team across the school will increase because of the work that the coach is doing.
And it's so interesting because I've also always thought that our work should be more of an ecosystem, and that was really because I came into education as a special educator and I didn't feel connected. And I felt like I was, you worry about the boxes on your assembly line, I'll focus on them on mine. And it doesn't really work, right? We're not building boxes. Yeah. We are growing children, humans who are going to, build into our society and grow our society. And so, I love this idea of thinking about our ecosystem and thinking about the implications of that assembly line. So how do we start to move away from that mindset and into this ecosystem? And I also love what you say about coaches having a secondary focus, or maybe a primary focus on the team aspect. That's something I've been talking a lot with my coaches is, yes, your work is one-on-one. And, when we think about our coaching cycles, we're typically thinking about that. But then you should also be looking for opportunities to support the collaboration of that one teacher with the rest of their peers and help them peer coach and build their capacity. So that way you aren't having as the coach to be the only instructional support for each teacher as an individual, but you can really maximize your efforts, create tiered systems of support for your teachers where they've got team support and peer support and coach support. And that's all aligned with the support from the administrator. So
years ago, I worked with a district designing a mentor program for new teachers, and they were trying to decide how long the mentor program should last. Is mentoring is it a 1-year program, an 18-month program? And they finally decided when the new teacher threw open the doors of her classroom and said, "You may all come in," that was the end of mentoring. And the job of the mentor was to grow the teacher into that level of confidence and professionalism that they could actually enter in to that peer coaching relationship with everyone. And that is an ecosystem that needs to be built.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we do need to focus on our own, small part of the environment, but it is serving the larger environment there. So that again, that ecosystem.
And I have to know how my part fits in.
Right. So exactly.
I've always been big on a teacher has to have at least a 3-year commitment to kids. So a 3-year commitment means you're engaged with the teachers and the kids the year before you're working with them. The year you're working with them, you're engaged with the other staff who are working with the kids. So if I'm teaching freshman English, I'm working with teachers who are teaching other freshman courses. And then I have to follow up because it's not until I get engaged with that next year that I really understand what happened in the year that the kids are with me. I always tell people, if you want to know how successful you were, go talk to next year's teacher.
Talk to next year's teacher, right?
That tells you a lot more than any test you gave during the year they were with you is going to tell you.
Absolutely. It reminds me of my friend, Andy McNair, and she always talks about, designing learning experiences rather than lesson plans, because experiences stick with you, right? And so if you really want to see if you did a good job, yes, looking at how much did that student retain into the next year? How do they continue to grow? I think that is I love this idea of this, 3-year commitment piece.
There's another word you used that I wanted to connect back. Mm-hmm. You used the term growing. And, mm-hmm. and growing really connects you to the term ecosystem, right. And it really connects you to the term environment. And right. I just recently found a quote from Ken Robinson that I put into a slide. But he says that teaching is like being a gardener. Mm-hmm. You can't force the plants to grow. The best you can do is to create that environment.
Yeah, cultivate that environment. Yeah.
As a teacher, I've got to create that environment for the kids. So let's click back. The love part becomes critical rather than right. the fear part. Okay. And then as a coach, I need to create that environment for the teachers. So that's another reason I promote the team is mm-hmm. that the team helps the coach create that environment just the way the teacher would want the kids in the classroom to help create the learning environment you want.
Yeah. And, I think for coaches, things like as we are celebrating the small wins and successes with an individual we might be working with, how are you also shouting that from the rooftops, building that collective efficacy, connecting them with other people who might benefit then from my small win, because they're struggling to get that same win. So, I'm a little closer in my mental model to where that teacher is. So I might be a better support than maybe a coach, right?
Absolutely.
And so just as a instructional leader and as a coach, thinking about how am I connecting the individual systems across the ecosystem together through team learning, through multiple means of sharing and communication and collaborating. And I think, tell me if you think I'm wrong, Steve. I think with all the technology that everyone was kind of forced in to learn last year, I think we've got quite a few great tools to help people do that, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Increase that whole communication and connected piece and teaming piece.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Now, I want to go back to what you said about the teacher being committed for kind of that full 3 years, right, at minimum, because I think that leads us into your next tip for reframing, and that's long-term versus short-term.
Yeah.
This is that Acorn conversation, which was really interesting to me. I was like, I've got to learn more about this Acorn idea.
Yes. Sam Chaltain, his example for this part was what he called the acorn brain versus the marshmallow brain. Yes. Okay. So, and there's a great video clip that's in the resources you put together for folks. So I hope they go get it. It's about a 2.5 minute video that'll walk you through it. But the marshmallow brain goes back to the marshmallow experiments with the 3-year-old kids who were so short term they couldn't wait the 10 minutes and get 2 marshmallows instead of 1. They had to have the 1 versus valuing planting an acorn. And he takes it, he connects it to a book. I just jotted down the author's name, Krasnowski, wrote a book called The Good Ancestor. And it identifies where in some of the in native cultures, they talk about thinking 7 generations out. So if you're making a decision now, what would people 7 generations think when they reflect back on that decision that you made now? So that's what it meant to be a good ancestor. And as I looked at that part, it pulled me back to, and I think it's something we continually struggle with in schools, is that short-term versus long-term.
Right.
So it really clicked. I was working with a school district in New Jersey where kids were coming back to school July 1 for summer school. That was their first time back in the building from the previous year, March. So from a year ago, March, all the way to July, the kids hadn't been in school. And they got a 6-week summer program. And I was getting a chance to work with some of the administrators, curriculum, and coaches meeting the teachers. I said, well, where do you want the teacher's head to be? Do you really want to be thinking about what impact you can have on a child's math skills in this 6-week period? Or do you want to be thinking about this child at graduation, this child post-secondary? So not that the math doesn't play a part.
Right.
But if you're trying to decide, can I take the time for the social emotional? Can I take the time for the student to build these life skills?
Creativity, collaboration, communication skills. Yes.
So those things can never be important if you're thinking short term, because fortunately we aren't testing creativity. When we do, it'll probably be the end of creativity.
Right. Very true.
But all those things that aren't being tested have got that longer term focus.
Right.
So how do I engage people in conversations where, as a teacher, I'm making decisions longer term? And again, I'm not overlooking the academics and the content, but I understand how it fits in, rather than this immediate thing trumps everything else that's on the agenda.
Right. And I think that really does involve a mental or a mindset shift. And again, it's we've got to reframe our questions. We've got to reframe how we look at designing learning experiences for our students.
And for our teachers.
And for our teachers. Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a really great point. I was talking with an assistant superintendent who we were talking a little bit about project-based learning and how in their district, they introduced it a few years ago and it just hasn't risen to the levels they were hoping it would. And they think they just emphasized, the product so much more than, the process of it. And they were in communication with other kind of collaborative group of schools, innovative schools that they're working with. And he's, something that another smaller school just kind of said to us was, well, if you want your teachers to be doing project-based learning, and you want everyone to be doing this, how does your professional learning model that? And they were like, oh, gut punch, so and really, like, we do have to think about, for our teachers, for our professional learning, as we are looking at mapping out our PD days and the specific things that will happen, how we facilitate team meetings, how we facilitate our staff meetings. Are we looking at these long-term pieces over those short-term pieces? That means, are we giving them opportunities to focus on love versus fear? Are we giving them opportunities to collaborate as an ecosystem, right? Rather than an assembly line. So I'm feeling it. I'm just seeing how all these things are just so intertwined together.
Think about a district, they've got 2 PD days in the calendar, and they're trying to plan something that the teachers are going to experience in this one day and see something different back in the classroom tomorrow. That, when I teach for short term, I generally get short term learning. Right. So now I can check it off the box that the kid passed the end of the unit test. But that's why my conversation with next year's teacher is so important, because we didn't plan the experiences that brought about the real long-term change. So that's exactly where we got to be for the teachers as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I want to shift into the fourth reframing that you have here for us. And I really love this part of your blog and dug it more into some of the links that you shared. So talk to us a little bit about valuing our proximity to learners.
I first found Nevia Avashia's, I first found her on Twitter. And she had just a small piece that she put in on Twitter that the people who were making the decisions about how to go back to school weren't talking to any kids. And she's a high school civics teacher in Boston. And she described that when the quarantine first hit and we had that March to June, she said, I can tell you that what I did with my kids was terrible. And she said, once I realized that September was going to come and we weren't going to be back in school again, I know the only thing I could do was turn to my kids. So it was about going to my kids and identifying what worked and what didn't work, and and where do we go from here?
Yeah.
And she writes quite a bit about how if you listen to the voices of the kids, they'll let you know what it is that needs to happen. So then she connected it to the Just Mercy book, and I got a chance to pull the movie up and watch it. And the Just Mercy is about an attorney who is representing minority poverty folks on death row who didn't get the justice that they should have gotten. And he writes that it's about proximity. You have to get into the lives of the people. And if you see the movie, he goes and meets all their family members and everything as he's putting his case together to represent them. And Anivia says that's where we've got to be with kids. So as I got thinking about that, I wondered to what extent that the quarantine actually got some of us in closer proximity to our kids. So teachers were suddenly inside kids' homes, seeing what their study space looked like, seeing in some cases commotion, or they were inside homes where the parents sat next to the first grader and assisted them all the way through the process.
Right.
Okay. Well, now both those kids are back in school. And the question is, am I looking at those kids the same way? Or am I remembering my proximity of the difference of what those two students are experiencing? I know that in many cases, empathy tremendously increased during the virtual time. Teachers became much more empathetic of their students. They requested much more feedback from their students. So they would teach something and then they would ask the kids, how did that go? And what could I do to make it better? Many teachers told me how much more empathetic their administrators were than they were used to. And so I want to take everybody back to, now that we're back in the building, are we going to lose those things? Or are we going to value the proximity and keep pushing it? And one last connecting piece for me, in many school districts, communications with families tremendously increased.
I was just about to say that.
During the quarantine.
I was just about to bring up family.
Are we going to shut everybody down now? You know,
Yeah.
I very early on, I worked with some schools and they said, wow, we started doing parent conference and both parents are there on Zoom. One's at work, one's at home, or they're both at work. And they both zoomed in because they picked the time to zoom in. And we didn't have to do all the conferences on one afternoon that we sent the kids home early. We could spread them out. I could go home and make dinner for my own kids and then take time to have a conference. So that whole proximity thing, I think we learned a lot from it. And what do we do to keep it?
Yeah. And you bring up a valuable point around that family engagement and having more student engagement. Something that I'm hearing from a lot of schools internally is we're going to keep some of our meetings, virtual or virtual options for some of our kind of staff meetings. Maybe we aren't coming into the same room. They still want that because there's value in that. But I've also heard some who've said, our ARDs, our 504s, some of our, we now know that we can offer a Zoom in option as opposed to the parent taking a whole half of a day to be able to come drive in and be here physically. So looking at just what are some of those things that we can continue from the, our last year and a half together that still fit well within this, so we can keep that proximity, right?
There's the piece of proximity that I didn't mention, and that's the reverse. Many parents got to see teachers teach.
Yes. Yeah. And that was either really exciting and enlightening or had some other effects. But it's the part that I love.
Many parents had empathy for teachers.
Yeah.
Which was an important piece.
Yeah, I think we just were all so much more connected. And as you were talking, especially about the student voice piece, it made me go back to that ecosystem. And, just as a reminder, our students are a part of that ecosystem. They are valuable members of that ecosystem. And so how are we connecting and collaborating with our students to continue to cultivate that ecosystem? I just think that's so valuable.
A Margaret Wheatley phrase: the greater the variety, the greater the diversity and quality of relationships within an organization, the easier it can deal with change thrust upon it from the outside. So if you think about an ecosystem that's very limited in diversity, if you pull the food group out, the whole ecosystem crashes.
Right.
But in a very diverse ecosystem, you pull a food group out, everything can shift and adjust to deal with the issue. So if you think about putting all four of these items together, what you're doing is creating that rich ecosystem driven by love, driven by relationships, driven by communication because of the proximity. And that's the organization that can deal with change thrust upon it from the outside. And as schools, we're continually going to deal with change thrust upon us from the outside. I mean, you watch the news every day now, opening school can be a week away and we still don't know what we're going to be dealing with, what announcement the governor's going to make, what the Delta variant's going to toss into the mix. And so the stronger we build that ecosystem, the better we can handle whatever it is that we're going to have to face.
Absolutely. And, it kind of reminds me around this idea of change resilience. One of my favorite quotes from Julie Wilson at the Institute of Learning. She talks about, our leadership work and our work in kind of school reform transformation should be less about how do I manage the resistance to change and more about shifting mindsets to how do I build change resilience, right? And so I think ecosystems, this ecosystem mentality is definitely a part of that. So many connections.
And thinking longer term. That allows you to breathe and build the ecosystem.
Right.
If
Think like an acorn, not a marshmallow.
That's right. You're gobbling up there's 15 minutes on the clock this period, and I have to use it to get this math problem in. When I walked all over how the kids walked in today. Longer term means I'm got the capability of keeping both things on the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is big. This is big for coaches. In my mind, it says a lot of listening by the coaches, so they can first identify what are the mindsets that teachers are working from, and then being able to introduce these other mindsets.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I want to point out something. We've got one of our viewers, Kathy Renfrew. She's been a guest on the Coach Replay show before. Says, it's about finding the assets, looking for the good things we want to bring back into our building the network and the ecosystems. It's an opportunity for us to rebuild, to create new bridges, I think, across some of our teams who haven't collaborated together as much.
I'm seeing it as an exciting time. I mean, I've been sharing with folks.
I know you were talking about retiring. I'm so glad you didn't.
There's no way. There's no way. I think the next 3 to 5 years are so exciting with potential.
Yeah.
The technology piece being one, the realization, the strengths that I think in many ways we really discovered how strong educators are when you think about what teachers dealt with and how strong and resilient kids are. What kids learn and parents. I mean, the strengths, many of the strengths of the ecosystem shone brightly. Yeah. And now let's capture them and not cover them back up to go back to something that existed before.
Well, and kind of going back to that proximity to learners, that was another piece that I heard from many of the teachers that I worked with and coached who were doing fully virtual teaching last year is they were like, I'm just amazed at how much these students can do and how little I actually have to know about a piece of technology, or like even I bring in a half-baked idea about, a Minecraft kind of connection to a lesson, and it becomes a project for an entire year that we continue to add new things into, or, whatever it might be. They were really amazed. And all of those teachers, are thinking into this next year with that as part of a frame of their mindset is, how do I continue to expand upon that? How do I continue to honor that? My teachers,
critical that coaches keep that on the forefront.
Absolutely.
Keep bringing the teacher back to what did you learn? What did you discover? And how are you going to apply that now? What new opportunities do those technology assets and the kids' skill and technology, many kids developed time management skills during this.
More executive functioning.
Executive functioning skills, absolutely. And so let's not take those away from kids now that we've got them back in the classroom.
Yeah, we don't need to put a crutch there. We don't need to build that for our students. So, and I think that's, again, just being reflective and mindful of and keeping that proximity to learners. I love that you have that in as the fourth one. I want to remind folks and give you just a sneak peek of the takeaway for today's episode. Every one of our episodes has takeaways with a few key points here summarized for you. Links, you can find the link to Steve's original blog on reframing the problem and reframing the mindsets, the link to that video on that Marshmallow experiment. And also, again, we've talked a lot about teams and how that can be a kind of a structured pathway for bringing in these different shifts in our mindsets and thinking about how we support and connect our teachers. And so a couple of great resources here for those coaches and leaders. Yeah,
those articles on teams will lay out some great guidance for administrators and coaches. And I've got Margaret Wheatley's connections to teams that built into those, so people can access that.
Yeah, definitely. You can also find the info to be able to follow and subscribe to Steve and all of his amazing resources that he puts out. I know we'll have you back. We were just talking before the show about having you come back on to talk about some accelerated learning and, kind of looking at our teachers at being able to do that. So it's always such a joy to have you on, Steve. Thanks so much for being our first guest.
You're very welcome.
3. So,
I'm excited. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Y'all be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to our show so you never miss another episode. And you can always watch us on demand if you're busy during the live shows. Thanks, y'all, and have a great day.